Depending on where you are in the United States, you may have already noticed there's a chill in the air, which means that fall is well underway, which also means that winter is not too far behind. And with that being said, you probably want to know, what can I expect to see for this winter season? What kind of weather will I be dealing with? And what overall can I expect to see for the winter season of 2024 to 2025? Whether you're a farmer who needs to look at the future almanac, or whether you're an average person who just wants to know how much snow you might have to brush off your car in the morning before work, all of that and more is going to be covered in today's forecast. So without further ado, let's get right into today's video. All coming up in just a bit. All right, now before we get too deep in today's forecast, I do want to mention a little background information here. This is the official NOAA CPC ENSO probabilities issued as of October 2024. So this is our most recent outlook. And if you're not familiar with La Niña, El Nino, or ENSO neutral, these are basically patterns that we derive from the overall sea surface temperatures in the equatorial Pacific, known from a region as the Niña 3.4 region. And this region in the equatorial Pacific has a major influence on our global weather patterns. Now, we have far more different regions that also influence the weather, but this is one of the major ones that we want to focus on for our winter season. Now, if you want more information on how La Niña and El Nino influence the weather during winter, I did just make a video about that, so you can go ahead and watch that before you watch this, but I'm not going to go too deep into that for this video. And as of right now, you can see we're well underway into La Niña. So you can see there we have a 60% chance as of September, October, and November. And we are heading up to about a 75% chance there around November, December, and January. So you can see there, we're really heading to La Niña. There's no doubt about it, right? We are headed right into that pattern. So what does that mean overall, right? And that's what we're going to be going over in today's video. We're going to be going over what you can expect to see, not only based off of La Niña, but the other factors that I've considered to place in this forecast. Now, I'm not going to list those individual factors, as this video would be going on forever, but do know that I did not just consider La Niña as my sole source for this forecast. If you are curious as to what other patterns I considered for this forecast, I will list those in the description, but we're not going to go too deep in that right now. But as you see, by the time we get to February, March, and April, we actually take a turn for neutral. Okay, so that's that gray region there. So this is no longer La Niña or El Nino. So we're kind of taking a bit of a middle ground, and it's going to switch things up by the time of spring. So that's another factor we have to consider. Okay, so this is only taking time to visit us during the winter, and then it's already gone again. We're done with it, and we're back to another pattern switch up by the time of spring. All right, now with that information out of the way, we're going to get right into our forecast map. So our first forecast map that we're going to be going over in today's video is our temperature anomaly forecast map. Now this map is designed to tell you whether you are expecting normal temperatures for your winter season, above average temperatures, or below average temperatures. So let's go ahead and start off for that wide light blue region for much of the northern United States. Now this region is indicated as your slightly below average region for temperatures. So this isn't going to be a drastic change in your temperatures. It's not going to be some Arctic day after tomorrow type condition, but this is more or less going to be some slightly more frigid temperatures overall throughout your winter season. So maybe a few degrees colder than what is typical for your winter season overall throughout the entirety of your winter season. Now sticking to the theme here for the slight changes, we're going to move down to the south where we have that light orange region. This, on the contrary, is your slightly above average region. So just like the slight change, we're looking at this one in a positive direction where we're expecting slightly above average conditions for your temperature. So consider that a couple degrees above average, maybe a few, and there's not really going to be too much of a change. So it's not going to be blistering hot down here, but it's overall going to feel a little bit warmer down to the south than it would in a typical winter season due to that influence from La Niña. Now, before we get into those deeper regions there, I do want to mention, you may be wondering, okay, what's influencing this divide amongst all the temperatures? Well, what we see here is the influence from the jet stream. So we have that jet stream kind of elevated over the west, okay? So we have ridging in the west, which is obviously going to lock a lot of that warmer air down to the south. And then we see a dip, okay? So that's that trough that we talk about in the eastern part of the United States. But I do believe overall that's still going to be elevated this year, okay? So we're not going to see as far of a dip down south as we did during El Nino. And with El Nino, we actually had what's known as a subtropical jet stream. Now that has weakened to the point where it's no longer a major influence on the southern United States weather. So that means that we're really seeing a lot of that warmer, drier air lock down to the south, while we see those cooler, wet patterns lock up to the north. and overall that's going to keep this kind of divide going on. And the middle part is where we're expecting that jet stream to stay pretty consistent throughout the winter season of 2024 to 2025. So now moving on to that dark blue region up to the north there, we see this includes portions of Montana, North Dakota, South Dakota, Minnesota, and parts of far northeastern Wyoming there. So these areas are expected to be a lot colder than average. And you may already suspect, if you're from these areas or if you know anything about this region, this area is already really cold in the winter. Okay, we're talking about consistent sub-zero temperatures within this region throughout the entirety of the winter. So this is going to be a bit of a cooler area, okay? So you guys are already used to this, but it's going to be a lot cooler than what is typically expected. And that's something that we do have to pay attention to, okay? Even though you guys are well equipped to prepare for the cold air, especially as cold as it's going to get, is definitely a dangerous thing. And if you're exposed to it, and if you have too much exposure, it can become dangerous. So keep that in mind when you're going into your winter season. Prepare, have the kids bundled up, have yourself bundled up, and make sure to stay warm and make sure you don't get too much exposure to the cold air. All right, now on the contrary, down to the south, we see that darker orange region there, and that is indicating above average temperatures. So this is where you're going to see some of that heat starting to build up, and I know everybody down south is already done with the heat, okay? Now you deal with it a lot, but this winter is going to be a bit warmer, okay? You had your change last winter where you were a little bit cooler, so now it's time to kind of pay up for that little bit of a positive change, and it's going to be a little bit warmer this winter. So a lot of this area is going to be locked down to the south, and it's not like you're not going to see any cold air reaching down south. When we get big Arctic air masses, if we have the chance to have that happen this year, which I'm not rolling out one or two big cold fronts that are going to come through and bring that colder air to the south, but I do believe for the most part it's going to stay fairly warmer down here to the south. But again, not rolling out the potential where we have one or two big Arctic invasions that may bring some cooler air further south down into the Dixie Alley area and a lot of those far southeastern United States regions. All right, now moving on to our next forecast map, this is our precipitation anomaly forecast map. So like the temperature anomaly forecast map, this is going to be telling us the changes that we can expect to see. However, this time it's for precipitation. So as you can see here, we're going to start up in the Pacific Northwest where we see that light green region. So this is our slightly above average precipitation region. We are expected with La Niña to have an active jet stream, okay, coming off of the Pacific, but we also see the polar jet stream come down and meet this area. So we're going to see a lot of colder air coming in and a lot of wet air coming in off the Pacific, two jet streams interacting with each other, both bringing the equal opportunity for weather systems to form around here and even come off of the coastline. So we're going to see that potential for a lot of precipitation to be interacting here, especially with that orographical lift off to the west coast there, where we see that consistent precipitation building up along the coast near Seattle and Portland, Oregon. So these areas are definitely going to be in an area of high precipitation activity, whether that be snowfall a lot of the time throughout the winter, or maybe if you're lower down in the valleys and you have some of that warmer lingering air, you will maybe see a little bit more rainfall rather than snowfall. So basically, altogether, this is just all precipitation forms combined to show you that you have the probability to have slightly increased precipitation overall. We see the same scenario over here for portions of the Midwest and Great Lakes regions here. You see a widespread area throughout the Midwest, including Iowa, and then we see that kind of thin out over towards the Great Lakes there and into the northeastern United States. So this area is going to be where a lot of troughing is expected to occur, and I do believe overall we're going to see a lot of weather systems pass through this area. I do believe we'll see some pretty active weather systems develop off of the Rocky Mountains. They'll take a little bit to develop over the Great Plains, and then they'll really become active over the Great Lakes and head up through those areas. So I believe with two different areas where we're having weather systems come from, it's going to be a pretty active precipitation pattern for this area, thus keeping things pretty wet for this winter. Now moving to the south, we see that widespread light yellow region there, and this is your slightly below average region for precipitation. So here I am expecting a slight decrease in precipitation. So not only have you expected those warmer temperatures throughout the south, but you're also expecting that decreased precipitation. This doesn't mean you're going to be going through an intense drought down here, but I do believe overall some decreased precipitation overall, maybe by a couple inches, is what you can expect to see for this season this winter. Now we also see up there for portions of the far northwestern United States near Seattle and Portland, Oregon, you're in that dark green region. This is your above average precipitation region. So obviously these areas are already very rainy. We see consistent precipitation patterns there, but I do believe this winter is going to be a lot more wet, and overall this is going to be a very active area for precipitation. We also see that for portions of the Great Lakes near Wisconsin, Michigan, and areas that are typically expected by lake effect snowfall as well. Now, this is something that we're going to be going over in our snowfall anomaly forecast map on the next slide, but right now I will kind of stick to just overall precipitation. I do believe that this is really going to be an area where we see a lot of different influences of precipitation come together. Not only do we have multiple influences of weather systems from two different possible paths that I've considered, but we also see the influence of lake effect snowfall and maybe an increase in that this season. So I do believe overall a very active precipitation pattern for this area this winter. Now, the portions of the south central United States, we do see a dark brown region, relatively small, but I do believe that this is going to be an area that's going to see a great deal less precipitation overall. So this area is typically pretty dry. We see this start to transition from the Great Plains type environment to more of a desert type environment. And overall, it's already dry, but I do believe it's going to stay relatively drier this winter, keeping things pretty dry for this area this winter season. All right, now moving on to our final anomaly style forecast map. This is our snowfall anomaly forecast map. Now, like the other maps, this is telling you the change, but this one is about snowfall. So we're going to be telling you whether you're going to be seeing above average, normal, or below average snowfall here. Now, I do want to mention that some of the areas that are not colored are going to be experiencing snowfall. Obviously, the further north you go, you're going to be experiencing snowfall, and maybe a lot at that. But down south, near the Gulf Coast, you may not see any, obviously, because typically those areas don't see snowfall during the winter season. So that area is not telling you how much you're going to see. If you are curious as to how much snowfall you'll see, I did make a snowfall forecast for the season that should pop up right there in the top right corner of this video. And overall, I'm just going to keep this to being above or below average. And overall, I'm just going to keep this pretty basic for this forecast. All right, starting off there in the light blue region there for much of the Pacific Northwest, we do see anywhere from Oregon all the way up into Montana and portions of those northern Rocky Mountains. We do see a slight increase in snowfall. Obviously, we saw that we're having that slight increase in precipitation expected, and we're also expecting some slightly cooler conditions and cooler overall conditions for this area, depending on where you are. And overall, that's going to bring an increase for snowfall. Not too much, but a slight increase for these areas in the light blue. I do believe that's your possibility for the season. We also see for much of those areas that are expecting that slight increase in precipitation for much of the Midwest and Great Lakes. We also see that slight increase of snowfall. We're going to see that trough bring a lot of cooler air down, and with that interaction with the Gulf moisture, we're only asking for a lot of snowfall and a lot of frozen precipitation at that. So overall, I do believe we're going to see some pretty active snowfall patterns for this area. Obviously, these areas see a good bit of snowfall every season already, so we're only putting that into a slight increase on that. I don't think it's going to exceed that much more. Now, moving on down to the southwest, we see an area that typically does see at least a couple inches to many inches, depending on what higher elevation area you are. But overall there, you see these are areas that typically experience snowfall. And this season, I do believe that for these areas, because the jet stream is locking in warmer, drier air, I do believe some slight decrease in your snowfall patterns are to be expected this season. As a result, we also see the similar scenario over here for portions of the Smoky Mountains, the portions of the Mid-Atlantic, and overall into the Northeast along the northeastern coastline. We do see a slight decrease in snowfall. For a lot of those areas along the northeast coastline, this is not to do with drier air and less precipitation, because these areas are still expected to receive a good bit of precipitation this winter. We see an active jet stream pattern moving through there. This is more so caused by a lot of warmer air. Okay, so the Atlantic Ocean is steaming, and it's still steaming, and I do believe that that's going to keep those surface temperatures near the coastline a lot warmer, and I do think that at times that will keep things a little too warm near the coast for snowfall this season. But that doesn't mean you're not going to see any snowfall at all. You're still going to see snowfall for those areas, but again, this is a slight decrease in that matter. All right, now moving on to the dark blue region here, we are expecting above average conditions for snowfall. Now, these areas in the Cascade Mountains and areas in higher elevations typically see hundreds of inches each season, so you're already expecting a lot of snowfall. But I do believe on top of that, we're going to see above average snowfall, even down in the valleys where you may only see 20 to 50 inches, depending on where you are. Obviously, that's not a set number, but depending on where you are in those valleys, I do believe you're still expecting to see a good deal of snowfall and above average snowfall on that. Now, also for much of the Great Lakes, we do see that as well. Now, I did want to go into a little bit of a debriefing of why I expect there's going to be above average lake effect snowfall, and this is a result of warmer lakes. Okay, so we've already seen these lakes are very steamy. This is nothing new. They get very warm throughout the summer season, but this year they're particularly above average, along with much of the surface water anomalies. And I do believe that when that interacts with that colder air that is expected, okay, so we're expecting cooler temperatures than average for this area. I do believe that it's going to create a very strong convective process that's going to lead to some increased yields for lake effect snowfall this season. And along with that, we're already expecting a very active jet stream pattern. So like I have mentioned, we are expecting those systems to develop off of the eastern Rockies, move up through the Midwest and into the Great Lakes, but we also are expecting the polar jet stream from the north to trough down and create some of those systems and bring some of those systems down into the Great Lakes, which is going to influence a lot of precipitation, and a lot of that's going to be snowfall. And once that interacts with that Great Lakes moisture, that's only going to influence these storms greater. So we're likely to see some pretty high yields for snowfall in this area. All right, now heading into our overall forecast map for this forecast here, we are expecting colder and wet conditions for the Pacific Northwest there. You see in that green-blue region there. And overall, this is to be expected. This is the Pacific Northwest, but with those cooler conditions expected, along with those increased precipitation conditions, I do believe overall it's going to be colder and wet this season. Moving on down to the south there, we see mildly wet. So this is going to be kind of a transition from the south and the north. This is going to be a middle ground, and I do believe you're still going to see precipitation in this region, maybe even some active precipitation patterns at that. But overall, I don't think it's going to be too crazy. It's not going to be system after system, but more rather mild conditions overall with some wet action. All right, now to the east there, we see mountain snow. This is a pretty typical region in every one of my forecasts. I actually left this out in the last forecast map, but I wanted to bring it back because it's just pretty typical. Not a lot of people live in those higher elevation areas. It's not like people are living on top of the Rocky Mountain peaks. Maybe you are, I'm not going to discriminate, but overall, it's going to be the majority of the people living in the valleys of this region that are going to comprise the population. And with this, basically just a lot of mountain snow. Again, these areas see a lot of snow each season, and that's not to be changed this season. Now, to the southern Rockies, that's where you start to see a bit of that decreased precipitation that we talked about with our snowfall anomaly, but overall, I do believe it's going to be a very active season, a good season for skiing as well, the further north you get in those Rocky Mountains. So if you're trying to book a ski trip, I'd recommend to go further north near Montana. Very good season this year, especially the further north you get. Now to the east there, we see frigid. This is that area that we talked about where we have that dark blue region on the temperature anomaly map. This is going to be a lot cooler than average conditions. Okay, so it's already going to be cold here, very typical for winter season, but we're expecting those frigid conditions. I believe that's a very good name to describe this region because it's just going to be pure cold. Very cold this winter, and if that's for you, good, but I wouldn't want to be here because far sub-zero temperatures are a little too cold for me. All right, now down a bit to the central United States, we see winter development, and this is basically kind of a winter birth region, okay? So we're going to see storms kind of give way here, known through a process called leaf cyclogenesis. Now, I'm not going to go into what that term means because obviously it sounds crazy and hectic, but basically, what it means is it's a process off the eastern side of the Rockies here where we see the development of low pressure systems, and with that, these will develop over the Midwest and then bring the potential for snowfall. So a lot of those are going to be originating right off the eastern side of the Rockies, and overall, that's another region that will develop through here. So oftentimes you can see that winter development happening right here within this region. Now to the south there, we see that warmer region in the orange. This stretches from portions of the Southwest all the way to the Mid-Atlantic and portions of the Southeastern United States. So it's pretty self-explanatory. Warmer conditions overall for your winter season, and overall not too hot, but just fairly warm for your winter season. Now further south, we see that orange region. I actually think it looks more like orange juice to me, but warmer and drier overall. So we're expecting those warmer conditions just like the orange region to the north, but we're also expecting those drier conditions overall for much of this area. I do believe that a lot of these areas are going to be pretty dry this season. Again, not much of a drought that's going to be going on. It's not something that's going to be a major impact on your crops or anything like that, but I do believe that overall it's just going to be a bit drier this season until we reach about February or March when we start to see those precipitation patterns start to pick back up. Now to the Mid-Atlantic, we see that purple region there. This is our mixed region, and this is kind of going to be going back and forth. So that doesn't mean you're going to be seeing mixed precipitation, but rather it's going to be a mix of snowfall, maybe some sleet, okay, but more or less it's going to be back and forth between snowfall and rain. We're going to see kind of a battle between the warmer weather and the cooler weather. So this is kind of a division here, and this is pretty typical for this region, but especially in La Niña, I think this is going to be pretty active this season for this area. All right, now for portions of the Great Lakes, we see that blue region there that's called stormy. And no, this doesn't mean thunderstorms. I had a lot of my friends ask me if this meant thunderstorms, and no, we're not talking about thunderstorms this winter. We're talking about stormy conditions overall. So a lot of active precipitation coming through here in the most likely form of snowfall coming through this area. So you're going to see a lot of storminess coming through here, I do believe. And again, that's not going to be every single day. Doesn't even mean every single week. But overall, I think out of the entire United States, this is going to be our most active region for snowfall. We're going to see a lot of winter development through this area, and overall just very stormy conditions, but in the form of winter storms, not thunderstorms. And slightly to the southeast there, we see the white region that says occasional storms. And this is kind of a carry on to the blue region, but I don't believe a lot of those storms are going to be as impactful as up there in the blue region. So again, we'll still see those stormy conditions here off to the east for these areas, but I don't believe it's going to be as significant as to the west. And for our final region there, which is the yellow region along the northeast coastline and portions of the mid-Atlantic, we do see less snowfall. We kind of talked about this, how we're still expecting snowfall for this area, but overall it's going to likely be less snowfall than what you're typically expecting to see for winter season. And again, that's due to that warmer Atlantic Ocean air, not a drier pattern. It's still going to be fairly wet coming through this region. We're going to see an active precipitation pattern, but I do believe overall warmer conditions are going to lead to less of a yield of snowfall overall for this season. All right, I want to thank you so much for watching today's forecast. If you did enjoy this video, I would ask you to consider subscribing for more US forecasts free of charge. And I would also ask that you consider following the Weather at a Glance official Facebook page for more inside information and complimentary personal forecasts when you message me over there on that Facebook page. I also want to give a huge shout out to our channel members, Chris Betty and Jay Case. Thank you so much for supporting the channel and what we do here. And with that, I will see you in the next video.